Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, we journey to a kingdom long forgotten, a place where silence lingers like a thick mist, weaving through every corner and shadow. Once, this land thrived. Its fields golden, its rivers bright, like silver under the sun. But now, Eldenhall lies in quiet slumber, wrapped in a silence that feels almost alive, as if holding secrets too ancient for words. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the stillness of the night settle around you. Imagine the soft wind passing through the castle walls, carrying whispers of old tales, of lost voices, and of a prince who dared to venture into the unknown to lift a curse as old as time itself. Let the silence lull you as we drift into the mystery that awaits. Eldenhall was once a kingdom that hummed with life. Its golden fields stretched far beyond the eye could see, and its rivers shimmered like silver ribbons under the sun. But now, the land had grown silent, eerily, unnaturally silent. The people of the kingdom whispered of old omens, of curses too ancient to understand. It was as though the kingdom itself had fallen into a slumber from which it could not wake. The silence was thick, clinging to the air like a shadow, unsettling every soul who lived under the once bright banner of Eldenhall. Prince Elric, the youngest of King Ulric's 3 sons, sat alone by the castle's high walls, listening to the sound of nothing. He had never known the kingdom in its full splendor, only the dull ache of silence that seemed to throb in every corner of the land. The wind blew softly through the castle grounds, rustling the dried leaves that littered the ground. But even that sound was muted, as though afraid to disturb the heavy stillness that blanketed the kingdom. The animals were the first to fall silent. It had been so long since a single bird had sung in the forests, or a fox had howled in the night, that most of Eldenhall's people had forgotten what the sound of animals even felt like. The fields, once full of the bellowing of cattle and the clucking of hens, now stood in mute testimony at what had been lost. Even the horses, strong and proud, stood in their stables with glassy eyes, their voices stolen by whatever dark force had gripped the land. Yet it was not just the silence that haunted the kingdom. It was the growing unease, the feeling that something far more sinister lay beneath the surface. The crops had withered, the rivers had run dry, and no amount of gold could coax the merchants to trade in the once prosperous city. The silence had taken hold of everything, like a slow-acting poison. And now it seemed even the sun hung lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the desolate fields. The people of Eldenhall spoke in hushed voices of an ancient curse. They remembered stories passed down through the generations, of forgotten deals made with beings older than time itself. The king, though a wise ruler, could do nothing to lift the curse, despite all his advisors' counsel, and the many desperate attempts made to break the kingdom's unnatural stillness. His 2 elder sons had tried as well, warriors both, brave and proud. But they returned empty-handed from their journeys, their spirits broken by the weight of the curse. But Prince Elric was different. Where others saw despair, he saw mystery. Where others spoke of endings, he thought of beginnings. There was something about the silence that felt alive to him, as if it waited for someone who could truly listen. And in the dead of night, as the moon cast its pale light over the kingdom, he often found himself thinking of the old tales, of witches and curses, of forgotten forests where ancient powers still lingered. It was on one such night, as the pale crescent of the moon hung high in the sky, that a strange dream came to him. In his dream, he stood alone in a dark forest, the trees towering above him like silent sentinels. The air was thick with the scent of earth and moss, and though no creature stirred, he felt eyes watching him from the shadows. Then, a voice, soft, yet filled with an ancient power, spoke from the darkness. "Seek the witch of the dark woods, young prince. She knows the language of silence, and in her voice you will find the truth." Elric awoke, with the words echoing in his mind. The dream felt too vivid, too real to be a mere product of sleep. He had heard of the witch of the dark woods. Everyone in Eldenhall had. She was a figure from the old stories, a sorceress said to live in the deepest part of the forest, where no sunlight ever reached. It was said that she wielded powers that no man could comprehend, powers that could bend nature itself to her will. His heart raced as the first light of dawn crept into the room. Could this dream be a sign? Could the witch truly hold the key to breaking the curse? Prince Elric knew what he had to do, even though it filled him with dread. His father, his brothers, the people of the kingdom, they had all given up hope. But he had not, with the silence pressing in around him, like a shadow that could no longer be ignored. Prince Elric made a decision. He would seek out the witch of the dark woods, for only in facing the darkness of the forest could he hope to bring light back to his kingdom. The morning of Prince Elric's departure was shrouded in an unsettling stillness. A thick mist clung to the ground as if reluctant to let him pass. The castle loomed behind him, its high walls stark and cold in the dawn light, while the dark woods stretched before him like a silent abyss. No one in the kingdom knew what truly lay in the depths of that ancient forest. It was a place of whispered legends, a place where few dared to tread, and fewer still returned. Elric felt the weight of the kingdom's silence press heavier on his shoulders as he stood at the edge of the forest, his breath clouding in the chilled air. Though he carried nothing more than a small pack and a dagger at his side, his heart was burdened with the enormity of his task. He could feel the eyes of the land upon him, invisible and watchful, as though the very earth awaited his first step into the unknown. With a steadying breath, he crossed the threshold into the woods. The trees here were ancient, their trunks twisted and gnarled as if they had grown in defiance of time itself. Their branches reached high into the sky, but no sunlight broke through the dense canopy. The deeper Elric ventured, the darker it became, the trees closing in around him like silent, brooding sentinels. The air was thick with the scent of moss and damp earth. And yet, despite the life that thrived in the shadows, the woods were eerily quiet. Not a single bird sang, nor did any small creature stir in the underbrush. Time seemed to stretch and warp in the forest's depths. Hours slipped by unnoticed, and the further Elric went, the more the silence grew. Oppressive, almost tangible. It gnawed at his thoughts, fraying his sense of direction, and the once clear path became a tangle of roots and brambles. The trees began to blur together, their forms twisting into strange, half-seen shapes in the dim light. At times, he thought he heard faint whispers, carried on the wind, soft and unintelligible. They came from no particular direction, surrounding him like echoes of forgotten voices. It was as though the forest itself was speaking to him, or warning him. Elric pressed on, his mind turning over the strange dream that had led him here. The voice had been so clear, so sure. The witch of the dark woods. Was she truly real? Or had the dream merely been the desperate imaginings of a prince grasping at hope? He couldn't know for certain, but there was a pull, something deeper, older, that guided him now. It wasn't just the promise of lifting the curse that drove him. It was the feeling that this journey was inevitable, that it had always been meant for him. As dusk fell, the forest seemed to close in even tighter. Shadows lengthened, merging with the mist that slithered between the trees like an ethereal serpent. Just when it seemed the silence would swallow him whole, a faint glimmer of light appeared through the thickening fog. Elric hesitated. The light was distant, flickering, as though it were a candle fighting against the darkness. Every instinct warned him to turn back, to leave the forest behind before it claimed him. But the voice from the dream echoed in his mind once more. Seek the witch. There was no turning back now. He followed the light, his footsteps soft on the mossy ground. The trees began to thin, their dark branches giving way to an ancient clearing that had not seen the light of day in centuries. At its center stood a crumbling stone tower, half swallowed by the twisting vines and roots of the forest. It looked as though the earth itself had tried to pull the tower back into the ground. But still it stood, stubborn and defiant against the creeping passage of time. The flickering light came from a small window near the tower's top. It was dim, almost ghostly, casting strange shadows on the stones below. As Elric approached, a cold wind stirred the mist at his feet, and he could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon him once more. This was the place. The tower loomed before him, its presence both foreboding and compelling. There was no door, only a jagged archway that led into darkness. Elric's heart pounded in his chest, the silence around him amplifying every beat. Yet he stepped forward, drawn into the shadow of the tower. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp stone and ancient earth. The walls were lined with faded tapestries, their patterns worn and indistinct, as if the stories they once told had long since been forgotten. At the far end of the room, a figure sat by the hearth, her back turned to him. Though he could not see her face, Elric knew this was the Witch of the Dark Woods. The firelight cast long shadows around her, but her presence was unmistakable, strong, ancient, and enigmatic. Before he could speak, she turned, her voice soft yet resonant, as though it had emerged from the very roots of the forest itself. "You have come far, young prince," she said, her eyes gleaming in the flickering light. "But are you truly ready to hear the truth of your kingdom's curse?" The silence that followed was not empty, but alive with unspoken promise. Prince Elric nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at him. He was ready, or at least, he had to be. The witch's eyes gleamed like embers in the dim light of the crumbling tower. Her face was ageless, neither youthful nor old, and her presence filled the room like a cold wind creeping through the cracks of ancient stone. She regarded Prince Elric with a look that was neither kind nor cruel, as though she were peering not at him but through him, as if seeing the invisible threads that bound his fate to the silence of his kingdom. Elric stood frozen, the weight of her gaze unsettling him. Though she had yet to speak another word, the very air around her seemed to hum with a dark, ancient power. The fire at her side crackled softly, casting shadows that twisted and flickered across the walls like whispers in the dark. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the distant rhythmic drip of water from the tower's roof, a reminder of the passage of time even in this forsaken place. Finally, the witch broke the silence. Her voice was low, each word curling through the air like smoke. "You seek answers, young prince," she said, her tone laced with a strange gravity. "But answers are never freely given. They come with a price that must be paid in ways you may not yet understand." Elric swallowed, his throat dry. He had expected such warnings. Witches in the old stories were never straightforward, but the fear gnawing at his heart made the price seem far heavier than he had anticipated. Still, he knew he could not return to his kingdom empty-handed. "I will pay it," he replied, his voice steady, though the weight of his words hung between them like an unspoken pact. The witch's lips curved into a faint smile, though it held no warmth. She rose slowly from her chair, her movements deliberate, and glided toward him with the fluid grace of one accustomed to living outside the bounds of time. She raised a hand, her fingers long and pale, and pointed toward a small table at the far side of the room. Upon it sat a silver bowl, polished to a mirror-like sheen, and beside it, a vial filled with a strange, shimmering liquid that glowed faintly in the firelight. "This is no ordinary curse that plagues your land," she said, her voice carrying the weight of ages. "The silence is but a symptom, a veil drawn over the truth. Long ago, your ancestors made a pact with forces they did not fully understand. It is that pact which binds the voices of the animals, for they know the secret of the curse, and it is their silence that keeps the truth hidden." Elric's heart quickened. "The animals?" he asked, confusion and hope mingling in his voice. "But they're just..." The witch silenced him with a look, her eyes gleaming once more. "They are far more than you realize, Prince. They see what you cannot, and they hear what has been forgotten. To lift this curse, you must first learn their language. Only then will you be able to unravel the mystery that has bound your kingdom in silence for so long." She turned toward the silver bowl and the vial, gesturing for him to approach. "This is the gift I offer you," she said softly. "The ability to speak with the creatures of the forest, to hear their voices and uncover the truths hidden beneath the silence. But be warned, this power will not come without its dangers. The animals do not speak as we do, and some may guard their knowledge jealously. Others may seek to mislead you." Elric stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the shimmering liquid in the vial. The air around it seemed to pulse with an energy that was both mesmerizing and unsettling, as though it held within it the secrets of worlds unseen. He hesitated only for a moment, then nodded, ready to accept the witch's gift. The witch poured the liquid into the silver bowl, where it swirled and shimmered like liquid moonlight. "Drink," she commanded, her voice now a mere whisper, yet it carried the weight of an unbreakable bond. Elric knelt before the table, his reflection wavering in the surface of the liquid. With a deep breath, he dipped his hands into the bowl and lifted it to his lips. The liquid was cool and tasted faintly of earth and moss, of something ancient and wild. As he drank, a strange warmth spread through his chest, and the silence that had pressed upon him for so long seemed to shift, to tremble as though on the verge of breaking. Suddenly, a rush of voices filled his ears. Not human voices, but the soft, frantic murmurs of creatures unseen. It was as if the forest had come alive around him, whispering, chattering, and humming with secrets long held in shadow. Elric gasped, his senses reeling from the sudden flood of sound. He looked up at the witch, who stood over him with an inscrutable expression. "You can hear them now," she said, her voice barely audible above the chorus of animal voices that filled the room. "But hearing is only the beginning. To lift the curse, you must speak with them. Learn from them. and follow the truths they reveal. As the voices swirled around him, a single thought rang clear in Elric's mind. This was the first step. The first step in unraveling the mystery that had shrouded his kingdom for so long. And with it came the weight of responsibility. The witch watched him silently, her eyes gleaming in the flickering firelight. "Go now, Prince Elric," she whispered. "The forest will speak, and you must listen." As Elric stepped out of the witch's tower and back into the thick shadows of the forest, the world around him felt both familiar and utterly transformed. The trees loomed as they always had, their gnarled branches twisting like the skeletal hands of forgotten gods. But now they whispered to one another in voices too soft to understand. Beneath the canopy, the earth murmured with the sound of burrowing creatures, and above, the faint flutter of wings sent ripples through the thick air. The gift of speech had awakened something in the forest, something ancient and alive. Every rustle, every snap of a twig carried with it an unseen presence. Elric could feel the eyes of the animals watching him from the undergrowth, their curiosity palpable. Yet none approached him, and none spoke. The gift was new, raw. He could sense the voices, but their language was elusive, as though he had been handed the key to a door, but had yet to find the lock it would open. The witch's warning echoed in his mind. Hearing is only the beginning. He walked deeper into the forest, his footsteps soft against the mossy ground. The silence between the voices weighed heavily on him, thick with tension. He had hoped the creatures of the forest would come to him, would reveal the answers he sought, but they remained hidden, retreating into the shadows as he passed. The air grew colder as the day stretched on, the dim light filtering through the trees like pale fading memories. Elric's breath misted in the cool dusk, and he felt the fatigue of his journey settling in his bones. He had no clear destination, only the vague sense that the answers he needed were hidden somewhere in the forest's depths. His mind raced with questions. Which creature would speak first? What would it tell him? And would it be friend or foe? Just as doubt began to creep into his heart, a soft voice broke the silence. "You walk with the air of someone lost young prince." Elric froze. The voice was soft, almost playful, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness hidden beneath the gentle tone. He turned slowly toward the sound and saw, emerging from the mist-shrouded underbrush, a small, sleek creature with fur the color of midnight. A fox, its eyes gleaming with a strange, knowing intelligence. "Lost?" Elric repeated, his voice betraying his surprise. "Perhaps, but I am not without purpose." The fox tilted its head, studying him with a gaze far too piercing for a mere animal. "Purpose is a tricky thing," it said, its tail twitching lazily. "Some are born knowing it, others stumble upon it, and some..." The fox's eyes flashed. "Some are led astray by it." Elric narrowed his eyes, uncertain whether the creature meant to help him or confuse him. "You know why I am here, don't you?" he asked, his voice steady despite the growing sense of unease. The fox circled him slowly, its movements fluid, its gaze never leaving his. "The animals know many things, Prince Elric. We know the silence of your kingdom, the fear in your people's hearts, but knowledge is not freely given, not even in these woods." Elric's heart quickened. "I seek to break the curse that has silenced the animals of my kingdom," he said, his voice firm. "If you know something, I ask that you tell me." The fox stopped, its sharp eyes meeting his. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath, the rustling leaves falling still, the distant voices fading into nothing. "Ah, the curse," the fox murmured, almost to itself. "Yes, we know of it. But curses are tangled things, threads woven into the fabric of time. To break one, you must first find its source." The fox's gaze grew darker, its tone shifting into something more serious. "And the source of this curse lies deeper than you know, Prince, deeper than the silence itself." Elric frowned, frustration bubbling beneath his calm exterior. "Deeper? What does that mean? I thought the animals held the key." The fox interrupted with a sly grin. "Oh, we do? But the key is not so easily found. Not all of us are willing to speak, and even fewer can be trusted." The words sent a chill down Elric's spine. He had known this quest would not be easy, but now he sensed that the challenges ahead were far more dangerous than he had imagined. The animals were not mere creatures. They were keepers of knowledge, guardians of secrets that had been buried for generations. The fox began to move again, slipping back into the shadows of the underbrush, its voice fading into the dusk. "Seek the birds," it called softly. They knew the truth once, before their voices were stolen, but even they may not remember now. You must find a way to make them speak again. Before Elric could respond, the fox was gone, leaving him alone once more in the stillness of the forest. He stood in silence, the weight of its words pressing down on him. Seek the birds. The first step had been taken, but the path ahead was still shrouded in mystery, and as the light of day began to fade completely, Elric felt the eyes of the forest upon him once more, watching, waiting for him to uncover the truth hidden within the silence. Night had fallen by the time Elric made his way through the deepening shadows of the forest. The moon hung high above, veiled by clouds that drifted like phantoms across the sky, casting the forest in a dim, otherworldly glow. The trees seemed taller, their branches tangled into a labyrinth that blotted out the stars. Every step he took was met with the soft crunch of dead leaves beneath his boots. Yet even this small sound felt swallowed by the vast, pulsing silence around him. The fox's words echoed in his mind. Seek the birds. But the birds had long since fallen silent, their voices stolen by the very curse that plagued his kingdom. How could he seek out creatures that no longer sang, no longer called to one another from the treetops? The task seemed impossible, and yet he knew it was the next step. The animals held the answers, and the birds had once known the truth. As he wandered deeper into the woods, the eerie quiet pressed closer, thick and suffocating. Occasionally, he would catch the flicker of movement in his peripheral vision, a flash of fur, a rustle of leaves. But when he turned, nothing was there. The forest seemed to be watching him, testing him. He could feel it in the weight of the air, in the way the trees seemed to lean closer, as if whispering secrets only they could hear. Elric's heart pounded in his chest, the rhythm of it too loud, too human for this ancient, otherworldly place. He reached a small clearing, the ground soft and damp beneath his feet. Here, the trees parted just enough for the moon to cast its pale light upon a gnarled oak, its twisted branches clawing at the sky like the fingers of a forgotten giant. It was then that he heard the faintest of sounds, so soft, so fragile. It could have been the breath of the wind, but it wasn't the wind. It was a whisper, not human, not quite animal, but something in between. Elric's breath caught in his throat. He stood still, straining to hear, his eyes searching the shadows for the source of the voice. And then, from the thick boughs of the oak, a soft rustling, like the flutter of wings long unused, echoed through the clearing. "We remember." The voice was weak, distant, as though it were coming from some forgotten place deep within the tree itself. Elric stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the oak's twisted trunk. He could feel the ancient energy of the forest swirling around him, thick and tangible, as if it were alive with the memories of all it had witnessed. "Who speaks?" Elric whispered, his voice trembling in the cold night air. "Are you the birds? Do you remember the curse?" The silence that followed stretched unbearably, the stillness around him heavy with unseen eyes. Just when he thought the voice had disappeared, a faint murmur answered him, barely more than a sigh carried on the wind. "We remember the day our voices were taken." The word sent a chill down Elric's spine. He stepped closer to the oak, his eyes scanning the branches, searching for the birds he could not see. But there were none, only the thick, twisting limbs of the tree, dark against the night sky. The voices, though faint, seemed to come from within the tree itself, as if the birds had been swallowed by its ancient bark. "What happened to you?" Elric asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why were your voices taken?" For a long moment, there was no reply. The silence seemed to deepen, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Then, from the branches above, the voice returned, quieter this time, as though it were fading, slipping away like the last remnants of a forgotten dream. "A bargain was made, a pact long ago. We were the first to know the secret, but the price was silence. Elric's heart raced. A bargain? A pact? He had suspected as much, but to hear it from the voices of the cursed birds themselves chilled him to his core. The curse that gripped his kingdom was no simple misfortune. It was the result of a deal, struck in the shadow of history, and the birds had paid the price for their knowledge. What was the secret? Elric asked, stepping even closer to the tree, desperate now. What did you know? The branches above him stirred, the leaves rustling like brittle paper in the night wind. The voices, so faint they were barely audible, spoke once more. The truth is hidden, deeper than you can see. But beware, young prince. Not all who seek the truth survive its discovery. The warning hung in the air, thick with the weight of unspoken dangers. Elric felt a shiver run through him, the cold of the night seeping into his bones. Before he could ask another question, the voices faded, swallowed once more by the thick, oppressive silence of the forest. He stood alone in the clearing, the ancient oak looming above him like a sentinel. The birds had spoken, but their words were as much a riddle as they were an answer, a bargain, a secret, a price paid in silence. And now, the truth lay hidden somewhat deeper within the curse, waiting for him to uncover it. But the forest had grown still once more, and the weight of the unknown pressed down upon him like a dark shadow. Elric knew then that the next part of his journey would lead him further into the heart of the curse, and into even greater danger. The deeper Elric ventured into the woods, the more he felt the weight of the silence surrounding him, as though it were a living thing, tightening its grip with each step. The birds' cryptic words echoed in his mind. A bargain was made. The price was silence. They had spoken of a secret buried beneath the layers of time, hidden so deep that even the forest seemed unwilling to reveal it. He had hoped to find more of them, more birds that might still speak, still remember. But as the hours wore on, the silence became suffocating. The branches overhead twisted into strange, gnarled shapes, casting skeletal shadows that danced in the pale moonlight. The air itself seemed to thrum with an ancient energy, as though the forest were watching him, testing his resolve. Elric had never known a world so quiet, so void of life's usual rhythm. It was unnatural, this deep silence. He longed for the familiar sound of wings beating through the trees, for the joyful song of a lark greeting the dawn. But no such sounds came. Even the wind, which once whispered through the branches, seemed to have stilled. He paused near a stream, its waters trickling sluggishly over smooth stones. The sound of the water should have been comforting, a reminder that life still flowed through the heart of the forest. But even the stream's voice seemed subdued, as though it too had been touched by the curse. Elric knelt beside it, cupping his hand to drink, the cold water cooling his parched throat. As he rose, his eyes caught a flicker of movement high in the trees, A shadow, swift and silent, darting between the branches. His heart leapt. Could it be one of the birds? He strained to see through the thick canopy, but the branches were tangled, weaving together like a net to hide whatever had moved. "Who's there?" Elric called, his voice breaking the stillness, sending ripples through the quiet. He waited, listening. For a moment, there was nothing but the faint gurgle of the stream. Then, softly, a voice, barely more than a breath, drifted down from the treetops. "We are here." Elric's pulse quickened. He stepped closer to the trees, his eyes scanning the thick branches. The voice was distant, hesitant, as though afraid to be heard. "Are you the birds?" he asked, his voice softer now, hoping to coax them into speaking. "Can you tell me more of the curse?" The leaves rustled overhead, and for a moment, Elric thought he saw a flicker of wings, a glimpse of feathers, dark against the pale moonlight. The voice returned, this time a little stronger, but still cloaked in sorrow. "We remember the curse, and the day the skies fell silent. Our voices were stolen, bound to the silence. We cannot sing, cannot call. We are trapped." The words carried a deep sadness, a weight that pressed heavily on Elric's heart. The birds, once the vibrant soul of the forest, were now bound to the curse in ways he had not imagined. Their silence was not natural. It was imposed, a punishment for something they had once known, something they had been forced to forget. "But why?" Elric asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why were your voices taken?" There was a pause, as if the birds hesitated, afraid to speak too much. Then, from the shadows above, the answer came, slow and mournful, like a distant echo from a forgotten time. A secret was spoken, a truth too powerful for mortal ears. It was heard by the wrong hearts, and a price was demanded. Silence became our curse. Elric's breath caught. A secret. One so dangerous that it had silenced the voices of the animals and shrouded the kingdom in this unnatural quiet. He felt the pieces of the mystery falling into place, but the full picture remained elusive, just beyond his grasp. "Do you remember the secret?" he asked, his voice tinged with desperation. "Can you tell me what it was?" Another long silence stretched between them, the air growing colder, more oppressive. The birds did not answer at first, and Elric feared they would retreat into their voiceless prison once more. But then, in the softest of tones, one of them whispered, "We remember, but the truth is buried deep. You must seek it in the place where the forest meets the sky, where the water runs still. Only there can the past be uncovered." Elric's mind raced. Where the forest meets the sky, where the water runs still. It sounded like a riddle, but he knew it must lead to the heart of the mystery, to the source of the curse. The birds had given him a clue, but it was veiled in layers of shadow and silence. "I will find it." Elric vowed, though the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on him. I will break this curse. The leaves stirred once more, and the faintest flutter of wings echoed through the trees. Beware the truth, young prince, the voice warned, growing fainter as though fading into the very air. It is not always kind. And then the birds were silent again. Elric stood alone beneath the towering trees, the quiet of the forest pressing in on him once more. The path ahead was unclear, shrouded in mystery, but he knew one thing for certain. The deeper he ventured, the more dangerous the truth would become. With a heavy heart and a determined mind, he set off again, searching for the place where the forest met the sky. The moon had reached its zenith, casting a pale, ghostly light over the forest as Elric followed the bird's cryptic instruction. Where the forest meets the sky, where the water runs still. The riddle looped through his mind like a half-remembered dream, but its meaning remained elusive. The deeper he walked into the night, the more the silence seemed to pulse with unseen eyes, watching from the shadows. The forest itself a living thing that shifted and stirred in his presence. He had no clear destination, only the words of the birds to guide him. And still, the weight of their final warning clung to him. Beware the truth. It is not always the kind. What could be so terrible that it had cost the animals their voices, plunging an entire kingdom into silence? The thought gnawed at him as he pressed onward, his path winding through the twisted maze of ancient trees. He walked for what felt like hours, the moonlight barely filtering through the dense canopy above, casting long distorted shadows across the ground. His breath hung in the air, cold and thin, as if the forest itself were draining the warmth from the world. Just as doubt began to creep into his heart, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A flash of russet fur darting between the trees. His pulse quickened. The fox. Elric slowed his pace, listening intently as the forest fell into a deeper stillness. The air grew thick, heavy with anticipation. And then, from the shadows, the fox emerged. Its eyes gleamed with an unnatural intelligence, its movements deliberate as it approached him. There was something unsettling about the creature, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. You continue to seek the truth, the fox said, its voice smooth and sly, cutting through the silence like a blade. But the truth is a dangerous thing, young prince. Are you prepared to face what lies ahead? Elric narrowed his eyes, the fox's words stirring a fresh wave of unease. He had encountered the creature before, and though it had guided him to the birds, there was something about its presence that felt wrong. As if it thrived in the shadows, feeding off the darkness that surrounded them. I've come this far, Elric replied, his voice steady, though his heart pounded in his chest. I won't turn back now. The fox tilted its head, its eyes gleaming with a strange amusement. Courage is admirable, foolhardiness less so. The path you walk is not one of glory, but of loss. The truth you seek will unravel everything you thought you knew about your kingdom and about yourself. A chill crept down Elric's spine, but he refused to falter. I don't fear the truth. The fox's mouth curled into a thin, knowing smile. It circled him slowly, its movements graceful, as if the forest bent to its will. Ah, but you should. For the truth is not as simple as you might hope. You see, the curse that silences your kingdom is not merely the work of some forgotten magic or the whim of a vengeful spirit. No, it is the result of a choice made by those who came before you. Elric's pulse quickened. A choice? The pieces of the mystery shifted in his mind, rearranging themselves, but the picture was still incomplete. What choice? He demanded, his voice cutting through the night air. What happened? The fox stopped, its eyes locking with his. Long ago, when your kingdom was young, there was a pact, a bargain struck between your ancestors and the forces that govern this land. The animals were the first to know the secret, but their voices were silenced to protect it. The silence is not just a curse, young prince. It is a safeguard. Elric's breath caught in his throat. A safeguard? Against what? The fox's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. Only a cold, predatory satisfaction. Against the truth. For if the animals were to speak freely, the kingdom's darkest secret would be revealed. And once that secret is known, there will be no going back. The curse is not the enemy, Prince. The truth is. Elric felt the weight of the fox's words settle over him like a shroud. A pact. A secret so dangerous that it had to be buried beneath layers of silence, guarded by a curse that had lasted generations. His mind raced with possibilities, but none of them led to a conclusion he was ready to accept. Why are you telling me this? Elric asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. If the truth is so dangerous, why warn me? The fox's eyes gleamed, its expression inscrutable. Because the forest watches all who tread its paths. Some it devours, others it guides. You have been guided thus far, Prince, but the choice is still yours. Continue down this path, and you may find the answers you seek. But know this, once the truth is uncovered, there will be no turning back. Elric stood in silence, the weight of the fox's warning pressing down on him like a cold hand on his shoulder. The truth, the curse, the pact, it all felt tangled, a web of shadows he could barely see through. But there was no other way forward. The fate of his kingdom hung in the balance, and he could not turn back now. I will find the truth, he said, his voice firm despite the fear curling in his chest. The fox's smile remained, a thin line in the darkness. Then, may the forest grant you strength, young prince. You will need it. And with that, the fox slipped back into the shadows, leaving Elric alone once more in the thick, oppressive silence of the night. The forest had grown darker, more ominous. But Elric pressed on, the riddle of the birds still echoing in his mind. Where the forest meets the sky, where the water runs still. The truth waited for him in the shadows ahead, and whatever it was, he would face it, or it would consume him. The forest had grown impossibly still, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for the moment when Elric would cross into the unknown. The moon, now shrouded behind thick clouds, cast no light, and the darkness around him seemed almost palpable. A heavy veil draped over the world, yet he pressed on, following the path the fox had warned him about. Deeper, further, into the heart of the forest, where the trees grew taller and older, their trunks twisted and blackened as though scorched by some ancient flame. The ground beneath his feet grew soft and damp, and the air thickened with the scent of moss and wet earth. The bird's cryptic message echoed in his mind. Where the forest meets the sky, where the water runs still. He could feel the truth drawing closer, like a shadow creeping just beyond his sight, elusive yet undeniable. At last he came upon it, a still black lake nestled in the heart of the forest. The water was perfectly smooth, reflecting the trees and the dark sky above in an eerie, mirror-like surface. No ripple disturbed its stillness, no breeze stirred the reeds that lined its shores. It was as though the entire world had fallen silent, waiting for him to make his next move. Elric stood at the edge of the lake, his reflection staring back at him from the glassy surface. This was the place, the spot where the forest met the sky, where the water ran still, the heart of the mystery. But what lay beneath? The fox's warning haunted him. The truth is not always kind. And yet, standing here on the threshold of that truth, Elric knew he could not turn back. His kingdom, his people, even the silent animals of the forest, all depended on him unraveling this curse. He had to know what had been hidden for so long. Kneeling at the water's edge, he stared into its depths. Though the surface revealed nothing, his reflection wavered slightly as he leaned closer, but the blackness of the water seemed endless, as if it could swallow him whole. Taking a deep breath, Elric reached out and touched the water. It was cold, colder than it should have been. And as his fingers broke the surface, a strange sensation washed over him. The air seemed to hum with energy, and the silence around him deepened as though the very forest were listening. He felt the weight of countless unseen eyes on him, watching from the shadows. Without knowing why, Elric closed his eyes and lowered himself into the water. It was icy, numbing his skin almost instantly. But he pushed forward, wading in until the water reached his chest. The lake felt unnaturally deep, as if it extended far beyond the forest's boundaries, stretching into some forgotten realm where time itself had grown still. Then, something shifted beneath him. A ripple disturbed the lake's surface, and Elric felt a tug, gentle at first, then stronger, pulling him downward. Panic flared in his chest. But even as he struggled to resist, he knew this was where the truth lay, beneath the waters. He had come too far to turn back now. With a final breath, he let the lake pull him under. The cold enveloped him, and for a moment, the world was nothing but darkness and freezing water pressing in from all sides. Then, slowly the darkness began to lighten. Shapes emerged from the murky depths, ruins of stone, half buried in silt and tangled in weeds. He saw pillars, cracked and broken, etched with runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. The remains of an ancient temple lay before him, forgotten and submerged beneath the waters for centuries. Elric drifted through the sunken ruins, his heart pounding as he realized what this place was. An altar to the old gods, the ones his ancestors had made a pact with, the ones who had cursed his kingdom. At the center of the temple, he saw it, a stone tablet carved with symbols that pulsed with an eerie light. It was from this tablet that the curse had been born. Elric's mind raced as he drew closer, his fingers brushing the cold stone. The moment he touched it, a flood of images filled his mind, visions of a time long past, when the kingdom had been on the brink of ruin. The royal family had made a desperate bargain with the forest spirits, offering their silence in exchange for prosperity and protection. The animals, the guardians of the forest's secrets, had known too much. They had seen the pact and the dark truth behind it. To prevent them from revealing the cost of the bargain, their voices had been taken, bound by the curse to eternal silence. The kingdom's prosperity had flourished, but at a terrible cost, a cost that had now come due. Elric's vision swam as the full weight of the truth sank in. His ancestors had traded their souls for the safety of their people, binding the animals in a silence that had protected a lie. And now, the kingdom was paying the price for that betrayal. The truth was, as the fox had warned, dark, twisted, and cruel. The curse was not a punishment from an enemy, but a safeguard to protect the kingdom from the consequences of its own choices. With a sudden jolt, the waters around him began to churn, and the temple started to crumble. The truth had been revealed, but the lake would not allow him to leave so easily. Desperately, Elric swam for the surface, his lungs burning, the weight of the truth dragging him down. He reached for the light above, breaking through the surface with a gasp, the cold air filling his lungs as he clambered back to the shore, trembling and drenched. The truth had been uncovered, but now Elric knew. There would be no escaping the consequences of what had been done. Elric lay on the shore of the Black Lake, gasping for breath, the weight of the truth pressing down on him like an iron chain. The cold clung to his skin, and his heart pounded as if it, too, were trying to escape the gravity of what he had seen beneath the water. The temple, the bargain, the silence. It all fit together now, like pieces of a puzzle long hidden in shadow. His ancestors had made a choice that had bound not only the animals, but the kingdom itself to a terrible fate. The silence was not a curse of vengeance, but a seal, a protection, to keep the truth buried. And now, as that truth had surfaced, the world around him seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting to see what he would do next. He sat up slowly, the night air cold against his wet skin. The trees stood like sentinels around the lake, their dark branches motionless. Nothing stirred. The forest, it seemed, was watching. I know now, Elric thought, his mind still reeling from the weight of the revelation. The animals had been silenced to protect the kingdom from the truth. But now that the truth had been uncovered, the curse was unraveling, its power slipping away like the dying embers of a long-forgotten fire. But what came next? What was the price of breaking this silence? The fox's warning still echoed in his mind. The truth is not always kind. Gathering what strength he had left, Elric rose to his feet, his legs unsteady beneath him. The forest stretched before him dark and enigmatic, and though he could not see them, he knew the animals were there, watching from the shadows. He could feel their presence, their silent eyes on him, waiting for him to make his move. The lake had shown him the truth, but it had not answered the most crucial question. How could he undo the damage that had been done? How could he lift the silence from the creatures of the forest without unleashing the darkness his ancestors had sought to hide? The answer came, not in a whisper, but in a sudden rush of memory. The witch. The silence is but a veil drawn over the truth, she had said. But answers come with a price. Elric had been so focused on finding the truth that he had almost forgotten the witch's role in all of this. She had given him the gift of speech, but perhaps she had known all along what he would find. Perhaps the key to lifting the curse still lay with her. With renewed purpose, Elric turned back toward the heart of the forest, where the witch's tower stood like a shadow against the sky. The path was long, winding through the darkened trees, but now he moved with a strange certainty, as though the forest itself was guiding him. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was watchful, expectant. When he finally reached the witch's tower, the crumbling stone seemed even older. The vines twisting like serpents around its base. The single window glowed with a faint light, and though the door had no latch, it swung open at his approach. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient magic. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, and there, sitting by the flames, was the witch, her eyes gleaming in the flickering light. "You've returned," she said, her voice soft, yet full of knowing. "And now you know the truth." Elric nodded, stepping toward her. I know the curse wasn't just a punishment, it was a protection, but I don't know how to undo it without releasing the darkness my ancestors tried to hide. The witch's expression was inscrutable, her fingers tracing patterns in the air as though weaving invisible threads. Your ancestors feared the truth, young prince. They feared what would happen if the secret were known. But fear cannot hold forever. The silence was never meant to last. Only by facing the truth can you set things right. Elric frowned, his chest tightening. But if I lift the curse, what will happen? The animals will speak again, but will the kingdom survive what they reveal? The witch tilted her head, her eyes glinting like the embers of a dying fire. That is the choice you must make. The silence has protected the kingdom for generations, but it has also trapped it. You can restore the voices of the animals, but with those voices comes the return of the old knowledge, the truth of the bargain, the dark price your kingdom has paid, and with it, the kingdom will change. Elric's heart pounded. He had expected as much, but hearing the words spoken aloud made the weight of the decision all the more real. The curse had protected his people from the consequences of their past, but it had also stolen the voices of the innocent. The animals who had been silenced for generations. Could he condemn them to remain voiceless, or to protect a kingdom built on lies? I won't let the silence continue, he said at last, his voice steady. The animals deserve to speak. The truth deserves to be heard. The witch smiled faintly, as though she had expected this answer all along. Very well, she said. The choice has been made. With a wave of her hand, the air in the room shifted. Elric felt a deep, ancient power unfurl, as though the very fabric of the forest were being rewoven. The crackling of the fire grew louder, the shadows flickering wildly against the stone walls. And then, from outside, came the sound that had been missing for so long. A bird's song, pure, bright, and free. The curse was lifting. Elric stood, his breath catching in his throat, as the sounds of the forest returned. The rustling of leaves, the chattering of creatures, the calls of birds high in the trees. It was as if the entire world had awoken from a long and dreamless sleep. The witch rose from her chair, her eyes shining with a strange light. The silence is broken, she said softly. But the truth, young prince, that is yours to reveal, or to keep. Elric nodded, the weight of the choice settling over him like a mantle. The kingdom would never be the same, but it was time for the voices long buried in silence to be heard. As he left the tower, the forest around him came alive with sound, and though the path ahead was uncertain, Elric knew he had done what was right.